oil company, and for the past 4 years, I've been working as CFO for Chanel in Scandinavia. So have been in the fashion industry and being in the senior leadership there for the past 4 years.
Thank you. And we're really excited to hear some of what you have to say, because most of us think of fashion as a female-dominated industry. So for somebody like you and the position that you served, I think your insights in terms of what leadership means to you would be really interesting. Thank you, Joachim. Jada, go ahead.
Perfect. So thank you for having me, everybody. So my name's Jade, and I currently work at Accenture, and so I'm a director in the strategy team, but I work predominantly with metals and mining companies, oil and gas, utilities, and power. My team is a bit strange. It's called Trading, Investment and Optimization Strategy. So actually the opposite of working where I work, generally with men, and have done throughout my career. So I've been in Singapore for 6 years, with Accenture for 3. And previously worked in the Middle East, always working in trading firms, metals and mining predominantly, with a bit of a stint within the agri industry. And then to start my career, I started in an investment bank. So again, all men on a metals trading desk, and covering Islamic Sharia finance. So even more men. So yeah, very, very interesting conversation. Looking forward to getting to know you all today as well.
Super excited to have you. Thank you for joining us. Shailaja.
Thanks again for having me over here. Very excited to be here. I'm currently working with PayPal. I've been with them for 7 years. I'm the financial controller looking after the international markets, everything outside of the US. Been here in Singapore for around 19 years now. Before PayPal, I started my career with GE, General Electric, and been with them for 20 years plus in India, US, and then in Singapore.
Welcome. So we've got some good finance representation here as well. Would love to hear more insights as we get into this discussion. And last but not least, our Zoom panelists
on the screen. Well, hi everybody. My name is Pranjal. I'm currently in India, in New Delhi. That's where I'm joining the call from. So for as long as I can remember, I've always been an entrepreneur. I think it started when I was 18 years old, and it started for me in college. And you know what they say about entrepreneurship, once you get a taste of it, it's very, very hard to go back, because very, very few other things in life will give you the kind of fulfillment that running your own business does. So yeah, I've run a variety of businesses. Actually, I've also worked in a couple of startups, but one of the main businesses that I started in my early 20s was a direct-to-consumer brand for lingerie, women's lingerie in India. Very interesting and exciting journey that I'm happy to talk about. And then I spent some time working with a startup in the automotive industry in India. After that, I moved to INSEAD. I was in France, in Singapore. And I think post that is when I did one of the most exciting stints of my life as the CEO of a tech company in the automotive space in Southeast Asia. So a company called Carmudi. I took that job straight after INSEAD, and I ran that company for about 3 years. Very challenging, very exciting times. That's where I mostly formed my notions around leadership, which I'm happy to talk about later. And after that, I worked as a consultant with startups for a bit. And right now I've moved back to India, and I'm looking to soonly start my next venture.
Wow, that's really exciting. So we have so much diversity and representation. I heard automotive, luxury retail, oil and gas, financial services. I think we're going to have a really great discussion. Let's get right into it then. So we'll start off with part one. And I gave you a little bit of an outline before, but would love to kind of hear about the challenges that you have faced across your leadership journey. And when I say challenges, it could be things that, you know, were a hardship at the beginning and you've overcome, or you met like a couple years after serving in a certain industry. It could be challenges that are, personal to you. It could be industry-wide. So maybe not just in your position, but, you know, anybody in your industry could face that. Anyone who wants to go first? This is a tricky one, I know.
I'll maybe go first because I think mine might be slightly more
Okay.
controversial. So from a leadership standpoint, as I mentioned, I've generally worked with men all the way through my career, having really, really great relationships and being given a lot of autonomy and decision-making from being very, very young, particularly in the Middle East. Where I've actually came up against the biggest difficulties is working with women, which is a shock. So that's why I said it would get controversial. So obviously in the metals and mining industry, there aren't that many women. And my role was to lead in trade finance, structuring, origination, and things like that. So you don't see that many women in this field, regardless of whether you're in the UK, the Middle East, or Southeast Asia. And in firms where I've had another female leader, it's actually a competitive battle sometimes. So even though you have your remit, you're leading on particular things, there's always that slight friction of who is queen bee, particularly in commodities industries where there's a lot of alpha people, whether it's male or female. So everyone has big personalities, lots and lots of opinions. And so that can sort of rub against other females in there, where in your mindset, you're like, women will lift each other up and it's going to be absolutely fantastic. And actually, sometimes it's not like that. Obviously, some of these relationships are very, very complex, and you sort of have to do a bit of a waltz and a bit of a dance around sensitivities, not stepping on people's feet and things like that. So it's something that I've sort of thought, okay, I work in Accenture, which is in terms of equality is very, very level split. So my team are all commodities people. We actually have more girls than we do men on the team. And so I think to myself, okay, the battles that I came up when I was a little bit more maybe naive, how do I want to work with the women in my team? And also as well, what is the message that I want to give across in terms of we shouldn't be competition with each other. Yeah. We should be, everybody lifts each other up. Everybody has completely different skills, skill sets, interests, passions, and things like that. So that can be quite difficult. I've heard other women say the same thing. Someone who worked in oil and gas had the same issue. Heavy industries, this seems to be the general issue a little bit in the leadership is, who's the queen bee?
So you said a couple of things that I think resonated with me. I come from a teaching background, and one of the things I used to say was in the classroom, it's collaboration, not competition. And they were all gunning for a very limited number of seats to medical school. And it's a 99% rejection rate. So almost everyone gets rejected. There's 4 medical schools in Canada, essentially. And this, you'd be in this lecture hall with like a couple hundred people, and they wouldn't share notes. They would not help each other out. And I remember kind of thinking, oh, well, rather than, seeing the pie as small as this is, the idea is to pull up another seat at the table, not say, well, sorry, there's no more space for you, or I'm gunning for this. So it's really surprising that I guess not that surprising that this pervades across different industries.
I think things such as not being invited to meetings, being sort of blocked out of different conversations, giggle then. Whereas in my mind, I'm like, invite everybody because someone will have something different to offer. I might not always be there. And also as well to help the younger generation come up. If you don't ever bring them in, whether they be male or female, how are they ever going to learn if you're not invited to actually take part or even just listen in some of these discussions?
Yes.
It's a tricky one.
Thank you for sharing that. Joachim, Pranjal, Shailaja, any comments or?
It's quite interesting because I started out my leadership journey in oil and gas as well, which is a very rough industry to work in, both from a leadership point of view, an employee point of view as well. And when I changed to fashion, I was expecting a change in how the behavior was in leadership teams. I saw quite the opposite, to be completely honest. The roughness that fashion and luxury industries is being run with is quite brutal in some cases, even though it's a very woman dominated. So the leadership team I was in, we were half. But still the issues that were faced there was a lot of the same issues that were faced in the oil and gas industry, and sometimes the discussions were even rougher than the ones we had in the oil and gas industry. So I think it's a really fascinating point, this thing with that maybe it's not a man-woman issue, but it's more a structural issue in how actually leadership is taken up in these teams. That how is it actually we hire leaders, how is it actually we promote leaders and leadership behavior. Because even in a very, very women-dominated business, it's no different from any other business, which was really, really surprising to me.
That makes two of us, and I'm sure a lot more as well. Any comments, Pranjal and Shailaja?
Yeah. I mean, so, yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, you're good.
Yeah, so I do agree to the last point that, you know, maybe it's not so much a man-woman issue, but it's just like what's culturally built into an organization where it's more competitive than collaborative. But I think that because I've always worked in startups and I have worked in a large corporation for less than 1 year in my life, I think I can bring the other perspective that in a lot of startups, I see that the culture is honestly quite different. For one, there's young leadership, right? So leaders are constantly trying to reinvent themselves. So there's a plus and a negative to it. The negative is that because these young leaders are new to their jobs, they have not thought much about their leadership style, you know, which can be negative sometimes because they are reacting to most situations rather than consciously responding. But I think that what that allows them to also do, and it allowed me also to do that as a leader when I was running Carmoody, was to constantly reflect because our leadership style is not evolved already. So it allowed me to constantly reflect if something happened in my company or if I got some kind of feedback from an employee, whether it was male or female, to adapt to that feedback and to adjust our leadership style accordingly. So I feel like that in startups, there's a lot more open door policy, and it can actually, or a lot of startup founders that I know in my network also, really, really put people first, and they're really trying to make it more collaborative than competitive. So I mean, nobody can entirely eliminate the competition. You know, that's like saying that there are 8 billion people in the world, right? And there are not as many jobs. So some of that undertone will always be there. But I think, yeah, on the startup side, things are looking up quite a bit.
I like the message of positivity there. Thank you for sharing. Shailaja.
I think for me, the big leadership challenge was kind of when we, in my GE days, when GE was known for a lot of acquisitions, so mergers. So whenever you take over a new company and you bring those people on board, you have all the systems and processes, but also you're dealing with the people and the culture, which again is different in every country. So we had done a big acquisition in Japan. And that was my first, because being an American company, I mostly worked with US and Europe, but this was the first time we were working with a local Japanese company. And the whole culture around how we work with a different set of people and the way to bring them on, it's not just system processes, but understanding them and the way they think, and then slowly bringing them over was really a big learning experience. Initially a challenge because things didn't move at the pace we were used to. And then you realize the local company and the country and the people culturally work at a very different pace. So understanding them, working, calibrating to their requirements, and then slowly winning their confidence and their trust and bringing them was a big learning experience.
Absolutely. I think one kind of insight from that is, you know, as much as we are all inclined to want to bring new forms of leadership into our professional workplaces or our personal settings, we forget that even if the people component were aligned, you know, we were working together and we're all on the same page about what leadership means to us, there's this culture that's already embedded, and that trying to undo some of the pinnings of that culture and establish a new norm is very difficult. And that culture isn't just informed by what we bring in or our attitudes and our notions. Sometimes it's just tradition and processes, SOPs, and undoing those so that our ideas can now kind of take wing is a whole new matter in itself. But thank you for sharing that. Would you guys have any other comments?
I think I have one comment on that, and I completely agree. And I think the biggest issue we are facing right now with the leaders that are coming up and have been, especially in heavy industry like banking, like oil and gas, is that we are not promoting leaders for the right reasons. We are not promoting leaders that are good leaders. We are promoting leaders that are maybe high performance in their position. And I think that's the biggest issue, because if we don't break that chain of not promoting great leaders because they have great leadership capabilities. We are never going to come to a place where we actually break some of these structures that don't promote diversity or promote skills or actually create leadership that actually creates a new young generation that looks at leading companies in a different way.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree. Any of the panelists?
No, I agree on that. I think there should be different tracks for people. Obviously, people should be allowed to progress, but say, for example, if you are a revenue generator, stick with that. That's what you like. You normally find quite a lot with people who are on that side, don't really want to manage people. It's not something that they take enjoyment out of. They have no skills for it, and they just want to sort of crack on with what they're doing. So companies really need to think about what tracks they're setting people on.
Yes.
Some people, I myself, I really like mentoring. I like working with young generations. So I'd be happy to do it, but I know a few people within my organization definitely should not be leaders. And that's everywhere that I've worked. And it's not necessarily a bad thing, because not everybody can be a leader. Not everybody wants to be a leader.
Yeah.
It's just finding out and companies setting it up so people can go down the right path for them.
Yeah, and I feel like a lot of the KPIs that we set when we're evaluating performance need to be reevaluated, because it's not about pure performance and hitting those statistics that is indicative of who becomes a good leader on paper. There's so much more to that, and I think the systems need a lot of undoing and a lot more of what some of the professors here at INSEAD would call like the OB method, or put the technicalities aside, bring the OB side in and do a deep analysis of personality skills, characteristics, or even desires and goals that every employee wants out of their work trajectory.
I think another thing, and a very different perspective to the whole thing I want to bring as we bring in as leaders, one needs to be aware of our own biases. Because our team, and I'll just give my own example, I look up to the international markets, so I've got my controllers in almost 11 different countries, and they spread out right from Russia, Israel, Latin, Europe. So each one is very different because our markets are at a different level of maturity, so the people we hire there are different. When I look at my whole cohort, I have to, some of them are really star performers because they are in the big markets. So these are nascent markets, we're just starting off. I have to be conscious about my own biases, and my expectations cannot be the same from all of them. So you need to give, as you said, each one is on a different track, each one is on a different evolution, but they bring different things to the table. So you need to be aware of your own biases when you are kind of evaluating them or working with them or expecting results. It could be different by region, by person. And as a leader, you need to be mindful and more inclusive and ensure that you're giving them that bandwidth to grow.
Absolutely. I mean, it's so much easier said than done, right?
Yeah.
We say we should all be aware of our biases, but we don't know how to bring them into awareness a lot of the time. I love that point though. If we all did a little bit better at it, I wonder what kind of work environments we'd be able to create, or what kind of inclusivity we'd find. Shall we move on to the second part? Because I'd love to hear about the allies or mentors that you've had, or the ones that you wish you had, and perhaps even when you were in a position to be an ally or a mentor to somebody else that may have changed their path or their journey to leadership.
Start
Yeah.
again with my earlier company. G had a very strong mentorship and
Okay.
So I was fortunate to be starting my career in a company which had very strong human resources team,
Yes.
people development process. We had some initially when we started as a trainee, you had like known mentors, but over a period of time, as you grow in the company, I think you align yourself with leaders whom you look up to, and they may not be in the same business in the same location, but I would encourage everyone to kind of have some mentors whom we can bounce your ideas off, or who are interested in your career and who can share ideas with. And as you grow through the journey, try and be a mentor to somebody, because it's your way of giving back.
Yeah.
And it's very exciting to see, it's like, I don't know, I'm so proud, like a proud mother when I see my people who've grown up and done well.
Yeah, of course.
Right. So I think it's a both give and take, but there is lots to learn. And today in PayPal being a younger company than what I come from, it's much GE. We are trying to bring some of those processes, and it's really nice to see young
Yeah.
people. And when you guide them to see how they grow, and at times, just let them make some of the mistakes, because I know a couple of times when you guide people, they may not always listen. They may pick up some roles, but then you see how they grow out of it. So I think mentoring is something both ways, being a mentor and being a mentee. Even now, I still have a mentor because you never stop learning and you always are growing. So
Yes.
it's a two-way journey. It's something one has to invest in it. So invest in both the ways, and it may not always click with the first mentor. I would also say, because it's a relationship you build, it's sometimes you try and put a structure to it. You need a mentor who's interested in you and investing that time, but also some with whom you feel comfortable sharing. So don't give up if the first one doesn't work, I would say, or a couple of them, till you find the right person and then build that relationship and invest in it. It's worth it. It's worth the
Yeah.
time and effort.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. I have a question for you. I know consulting is kind of one of those fields where the mentorship sponsorship is like built into the culture of the way consulting works, right? Has that been your experience as well? And have you kind of seen that change with your 3 years at Accenture?
So you are very, very correct there. So within all consultancy firms, I believe it within Accenture, it's from your first day, you either find your own mentor or you can be assigned one. So because my team is specialist, we normally link with each other from our global team. And it's a really, really important part of Accenture. As you go through your career, you stay with the same mentor all the way through. And so I am a huge, huge fan of this. However, I also think as well, some people shouldn't be mentors. Because it's stipulated within the organization. So if you're in a leadership position, you should have a certain number of mentees and things like that. I personally really, really enjoy it. And I know I mentioned to you yesterday, some days when I have bad days, I tell my boss I prefer being a mentor than actually doing my job. So I probably shouldn't say that to him. And so I feel very, very passionately about it. And I think it's because starting out in my career, I had some great mentors formally set up. And then I had some absolutely terrible ones who, they say they want to do it, but don't really give you the time of day. The relationship doesn't click and things like that. So every sort of formalized mentorship, everyone that's either been good or bad, I've taken away from that. Okay, what did I enjoy? What would I have wanted somebody to do for me when I was doing this? And then I've tried to adapt that as I've gone forward. I lead the Strategy Women's Network for Southeast Asia for Accenture. And so I think there's, about 175 people in there. And what I find really important there, and I think some of my mentoring there is actually, and to word this actually correctly, I think some of the mentoring that I do there, which is actually a lot more informal. So everybody within this group already has their own formalized mentor, and you have your talent discussions, feedback and things like that. I've sort of ended up being like mother hen. So an auntie to 175 people. So I get calls about, I don't like my project, I don't like this, I want to roll off, I'm interested in doing meta, aerospace, blah, 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 blah. And that to me is something that I really, really enjoy. So that's not formal. And I think sometimes having non-formal mentoring is just as important as the formal ones, not just within the work environment. So is it a relative? Is it a family friend? Everybody can provide different things to you. No one in my family knows anything about metals or mining. So you have to sort of find your own mentors, and they don't have to be in your field. It could be someone who's been an expat for years, or somebody who has worked in the industry that you're in that can guide you to be a friend. So what I would say is get as many mentors as you can. You don't need to label them as mentors, but if there's someone you can go to say, I'm not quite sure about this, or I've got this great idea, or I'm a bit struggling with this, that's a mentor. So the formal ones are great. But I think for me personally, the informal relationships I think are very long lasting because it's organic, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's people that you're drawn to. So that is what I would say. So, but again, some people shouldn't be mentors.
I love I love that. My two key kind of takeaways there were get as many mentors as you can, formal or informal, and two, not everyone can be a mentor.
And also one thing
I'm right
here as well, if you do have a formal mentor, always find out how many other people that they're a mentor to, because if they say I've got 10, 15 formal mentees, how can they help you? because it's not about the quality, it's the quality of the relationship that you have with them. And I fight about this all the time in Accenture. There's no point in saying I've got 10 to 12 mentees because it looks really great because I'm doing things, extracurricular. It's actually a detriment to both of you. You can't give enough time or the thought or the effort to it. So if you're going with a formal one, always double check how many people that they're actually working with, I would also say as well.
Thank you for sharing that. Joachim, I know you come from fashion, and I know they probably do not have a formalized kind of when we use starting consulting, it's like, ooh, mentorship, allyship. That's all you hear every day. Is that the case in fashion as well? Or do you have to really seek true mentors?
So the interesting thing about the luxury industry is that leadership is taken very seriously, because especially in retail, it seems that they're heading up in retail, leadership is so essential. So actually, to go back a little bit, like I started my leadership journey when I was 24, so I was quite young in the oil industry, where I got my first leadership position. And I never, like, you're young, you're still learning, like more like the academic part of your work, while you're also expected to take up leadership roles. And in that process, especially in a tough environment like the oil industry, the leadership values that you get are very, that's how to say it nicely, square. So they're not like a lot of the feelings, a lot of the like more the soft skills you don't really learn. So coming to the fashion industry, it's a lot different, because a lot of what is being academic in the fashion industry is also soft skills, because it's a lot of feelings, it's a lot of vision, and it's not so much like you need to drill a hole in the ground here. Which the oil industry is. So coming to the fashion industry, it was very different, because the people you work with are very different and the values are very different there. Sorry. So the person I actually learned the most from was, so in our leadership team, we had our sales director, absolutely amazing woman who was leading the whole retail teams across Scandinavia. She's now CEO of a big Danish skincare product brand. And what I really learned from her, we became close friends, not just in the workplace, but also outside work. And what I really learned from her was I, for the first time, saw a leader who really embraced the soft skills, not only in the good discussion by taking care of the employees, but also in the hard discussions you have with your employees. Because the good discussions are easy to have for everybody, because everybody wants to have a nice discussion, but actually learning how you properly have difficult conversations with your employees and make difficult decisions, but in a very human and in a very in a way where you are not emotional about, but where you actually put your emotions forward and try to understand, was one of the biggest learnings I have. So I think it's extremely important that the leaders of tomorrow actually take time not only to learn the hard skills and teach the hard skills to the young leaders, but actually embrace, even though the young leaders are only leading a team of 1 or 2 people, actually embrace learning them from a very, very early place, how important the soft skills are, and not only putting them in seminars, because all companies put in these seminars, and then you come back with a lot of notes, and you come back to real life, and nothing has really changed, right? Because the leadership engagement, the leadership is not really embracing this. So I think it's really important that we as leaders as well show how important the soft skills are, and really embrace it, both in the good, but more importantly in the difficult conversation we have with our young leaders.
Thank you for sharing that. Now, Pranjal, I know that you have a lot of experience in entrepreneurial settings. And in entrepreneurship, you often wear so many different kinds of hats. What is your experience with having good mentors, especially when you're setting out to do something of your own, or being a mentor or an ally to somebody who's, maybe young or impressionable, or maybe on the same path that you were recently?
Yeah, so I think enough has already been shared on the fact that mentors are important, right? I don't need to say any more than that about it. Mentors are extremely, extremely important. But, as I listen to the other panelists, I feel so envious that, in in large corporate environments, that there are companies that have existing mentorship programs, that, you know, there are people that you can reach out to, or HR is looking out for you and they want you to have mentors, because in early to mid-stage startups, there are no mentorship programs, there are no mentors. Even people who are cut out to be mentors don't have the time or bandwidth to do that, right? So I think as an entrepreneur and also as somebody who is working in an early to mid-stage startup, you really have to seek a mentor. And by that, I mean, you truly have to go out there. You have to find people who, you know, either you are impressed by or who you think can, you know, understand you, and you have to share your journey with them. And you know, when as a founder you take on a mentor, the relationship is very different, because it's not someone who you've worked with or someone who you will even potentially work with. It's just someone that you look up to, right? It's someone whose work you aspire to be like. And in that case, you truly have to, for them to be able to take you on as a mentor or as a mentee, you truly have to be able to like expose your soul, you know, because they have to fall in love with your passion, with your mission. They have to really believe in you for them to be able to say that, you know what, I'm going to take out a Sunday in a month and sit with you and really help groom you and guide you, because I want to see you be successful. So I think it is a very, very challenging but critical process. Personally, for me, I think I have been extremely blessed, at least in the past, whenever I was starting up a company or I was stuck in a phase of growth, I always had someone to guide me. And I feel like that as a young entrepreneur, the most important thing that your mentors do is, because it's like you don't know what you don't know, right? And when you're in your early 20s and you're running a startup, you're basically expected to know everything. You're expected to have answers to every question, but there's no one in the world who does. It's not possible. I've not had enough experience. I've not been exposed to these situations before. So how can I have an answer? And I think I've been stuck in a lot of those situations when I was running Carmudi, for example, and I've turned to my mentors, and the advice that they have given me has truly enabled me to make decisions that I didn't even know were an option before, right? Because they've opened up my eyes to things beyond things that I haven't been exposed to. So yeah, in the past, I've been incredibly lucky. I think even with my INSEAD, the fact that I went to INSEAD, it's such a crazy story. One of my mentors who's been guiding me for the last 10 years, one night he literally sent me a text message which had a link to the INSEAD MBA application program. And he said, why don't you apply to this? And I was like, that's completely out of the blue, you know, like, why are you sending this to me? I'm running my company. Why do I need an MBA? But that's how it started, you know, and I ended up going to INSEAD. So even when I look back at it, you know, it gives me goosebumps, because what a life-changing experience that was for me to come to INSEAD. Yeah, so and I think that in my life, so far I've always been super open. I think usually people who reach out to me are the ones who are running early stage companies in similar industries and backgrounds, but I don't think I've formally taken on any mentees, and it's something that I really look forward to in the next phase of my life.
Thank you for sharing that. From your and Joachim's kind of message, I heard that, you know, approaching allyship or mentorship, leadership overall with emotion is this tricky balance. Like, you can't let your emotions be 100% raw and unleashed, but you also need to show your passion and some of those emotions to who you're leading or who you're being guided by. And I wonder if we'll ever figure that one out. And when I look back at kind of my undergraduate days and they talked about what leadership was always skills-based, like always skills-based. Oh, you must be good at this, you must be great at that, analytical thinking, ability to like motivate. But like, where were the soft skills? The ability to kind of be vulnerable and like really showcase that. And I think that's the part of the message that we've kind of now realized and probably need to start talking about a lot more, how emotion plays into leadership and how you showcase that as a leader or a mentor.
I think one point on that, and I've been having a conversation with some of the team in the Strategy Women's Network. COVID was actually a blessing for this because you perceive, we all have leadership above us as well. You perceive, okay, this person is my boss. I must always be, punctual, efficient, blah, blah, blah. But everyone's on video calls. Everybody is in exactly the same boat together. Everyone has a dog that's running around, the doorbell, delivery arrives. All of these different things. And it sort of broke down the barriers of, you're my leader, particularly for junior people. I spoke to about this. I wanted to know how they felt about it. And they said they actually became more human. Everybody is, going through the same thing. We're all trying to grapple with the same thing. So I think from a communication point of view, it wasn't just on the skill side of things. You'd start the call with someone, what are you making for your lunch? What did you do at the weekend? Have you done any quizzes? Blah, 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 which probably wouldn't happen in a normal office environment where junior people felt that they could ask leadership, those sort of things. So I think that, I suppose you have to see the positives in COVID, don't you? But this is one of the big positives in terms of it's broken down barriers for mentees, leadership and things like that to be able to ask human questions, because, over the past 2 years, people at work, what? Who cares about that? We're all just sort of surviving. So I think that was a good thing that came out of it. And I hope that's one thing that does continue from it as well, for sure.
No, thank you. Thank you so much for sharing that. I think that the ideal leader candidate should only have like the one first criteria of what's required is be human, like you said.
An Accenture tagline, which drives me insane. They say be human, but it's so simple, but yeah. I think everyone gets so bogged down, particularly leaders where you've got so much to do, so much to juggle and things like that. But if you actually just stop and say, how are you getting on? What are you doing at the weekend? Do you know how was your birthday? Do you know those sort of things? It really does it makes a difference to people.
Absolutely. So far what we've done is we've talked about some of the challenges our panelists have faced in their careers and their respective industries. And then we've talked about where they've found leadership, mentorship, allies. I think the next part that we'll transition to, given all of that we've heard so far, what key pieces of advice would you have for the rest of us as we navigate to becoming leaders in similar fields to you, different fields? While that's a very, broader general question, I think even more granular takeaways would be really helpful too.
No, go ahead.
Sure. Yeah. I would say, going from the same mentor leader, it's the same thing. One is be honest and put yourself out there. Don't put up a front, because you have to be honest and people have to see who you are. That will build trust, whether you're a mentor or a leader with a group. Second thing, in my team, you set the rules, like if you're a part of team, we run on meritocracy. I don't want to discuss this, that, deliverables, what kind of leadership you're bringing to the table. At the same time, you always bring that confidence in your team that I'm there to cover your back if you're going to do it right. Once your team knows that you are a kind of person which works on meritocracy, which works on results, like, no slackers. It may work in other teams, won't work. They know, so you will attract those kind of people. You walk the talk, you weigh the same. Yeah. So, it's a very good space for anybody. And that's the leadership you build in your team, because they themselves are also leading others in their team. And that's the culture I feel you bring in. Because once people know that if you're working for this person or in that team, and at the same time, it is then your responsibility, the leader, to ensure that you grow your people. You find them that career, you invest, as a leader, I would really encourage you, everybody has meetings on deliverables and all those are standard things, but make it a conscious effort that once a quarter, once a month, whatever frequency you want, set up time with your team member to talk to them about how they look at themselves to get down the line. What are you interested in? What would you like me to work? That shows that it's not just work. I'm also going to work with you to help build your career. May not be in my team. I'll ensure that it could move somewhere else. And that's, I think, a holistic way of how you groom your team and that's once you set that cadence on that messaging, it will go with the rest of the managers and how they will take it down.
Absolutely. So Shailaja says I got 2 takeaways, correct me if I'm wrong. One was to put the authentic, real version of yourself out there, because how you put yourself out there will really determine what you receive in return. And then the second big thing I learned from you was the idea of asking those you're mentoring, you know, how are things going? How do you view yourself on this leadership journey? How do you view yourself at work? And also having that space to be asked that question, I think is really important. So you ask it to somebody else, but you also reflect on it as an individual.
Yeah, and just one point is that along with work, you also ensure as a leader, you're investing time, effort, and thinking about how you're going to grow your team.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
career development is playing on everybody's mind.
Yeah.
Everybody wants to know how I'm going to be trained, what I'm going to do next. But knowing that my manager is also investing that time and effort with me on my journey is a big motivator for the group.
Absolutely.
And that's, I think as a leader, we owe it to our team that if they deliver, it is for us to see that they grow and they.
Thank you.
I think the biggest advice I can give is to never get discouraged, because you're always going to make mistakes as a leader, and it's always going to be difficult when you make mistakes as a leader, but that doesn't mean that you should stop trying to be a good leader. Because the difficult thing about being a leader, the easy thing is to being a functional leader. It's easy to tell people what to do. It's easy to show people what they need to do, but that's not really how you are a leader. And I've taken myself in sometimes just to go back on that, because that's the easy way, is just to fall back on being a functional leader, but actually working on and constantly improving and constantly failing and constantly succeeding on being a human and being an emotional and empathic leader. You need to push yourself to do that. And there's a lot of times where it's not going to work, but if you keep pushing and you keep learning, you will in the end be an empathic leader, which is the goal in the end, right?
Absolutely. I think that we forget the essence of that message a lot of the time. As in every time you fall, you pick yourself back up and you keep going, because as a leader, it's not just about you. It's about so many other people, your team, you know, those who interact with your team, the organization on a big picture level. So when you stop, you don't just harm yourself. You probably are harming a lot of other people who have the privilege or the honor of being led by you, and maybe you're shaping their leadership journeys as well. Thank you for sharing that.
I think the biggest piece of advice I can give people on as you're growing as a leader yourselves, we've all had jobs, whether it be in a coffee shop or a bar or some junior jobs where you'll have had a great boss and you thought, God, that person's great, I really admire them. You'll have also had jobs where you're like, oh my goodness, this person is absolute help. Both are really important, because when you work with a leader who you think this isn't working, take away everything from that you think, I don't like this. I wouldn't want somebody to lead me like this. So when you do become a leader, you have that in the back of your mind, like, oh my goodness, I worked in a Saturday job working in a hairdresser and that person was awful to me because of X, Y, Z. Okay, when I'm a leader, how do I make sure that I'm not repeating those things is just as important as the really, really good ones. And over time, you sort of build up in terms of different styles. So I'm very casual in my leadership style. And as you were saying, they know though it's meritocracy, you have to get the work done, but I'm very, very relaxed. But that's came over time, and you have to build respect with people. Some people don't like an informal person being their leader. Some people like rules, regulations, all this sort of thing. So also as well, have a think about when you're a leader, what the needs are of the individuals within your team. Because as you mentioned before, with the different geographies, but also within your team, there's going to be different people who warm to and take to different styles of leadership. So I think being observant of the people that you're leading is really important. And one thing on the mentorship side as well, you're in a great situation in INSEAD because there's so many diverse people with different backgrounds, ages, all of those things. Take advantage of all of that in mentors. As I said, it doesn't need to be formal, but also as well, if you reach out to people who you admire, if they don't reply to you, they're not supposed to be a mentor. Whereas most people are actually really flattered if people reach out to them, and they might not be able to be a full-time mentor, but of course, I can grab a coffee with you. I'll have a half an hour chat. Let me connect you with my network. So reach out to as many people. Doesn't need to be in your direct field that you want to go into. It could be something really obscure. It could be cross-industry. but reach out to people as much as possible, because you'll be surprised. Most people, as I said, sort of take it as a very humbling and will want to try and help you and support you. So don't be shy.
Be shy. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Pranjal, how about you?
I remember a couple of years ago, the last startup that I was running, I was doing this interview. It was mostly because our company had really changed gears in terms of, the primary business model, etc. And the chat was supposed to be primarily about that. But then in the middle of the interview, the interviewer asked me, "So what's your leadership style?" And I remember very clearly that for 10 seconds, I was 26, 27 years old then. And for 10 seconds, I was quite stumped because I didn't know what to say. I knew what I appreciate in a good leader. I probably even knew what I wanted to emulate, but it hit me in that moment that I had never consciously thought about my leadership style. And I think that would be my biggest advice to all the young leaders out there that you find in startups mostly, is that take the time to consciously think about your leadership style and then put in place checks and balances that really help you stick to that path. It's very easy to know what you appreciate in a leader, but when it comes to situations, and in a startup, you're always firefighting. There's never a relaxed day when you get to be a good leader. There's always problems from the minute you enter your office. And again, I'm talking about early to mid-stage startups. There's always firefighting, right? So you don't realize you may want to be a certain kind of leader, but you end up being a very different kind of leader. So I would say that, consciously think about it and ensure that you have these checks and balances that help you practice that leadership style as well. And I think I really resonate with something that Joaquin said earlier, which is about not getting disappointed, right? So it's also very important for young leaders to remember that leadership is a skill that will take a lifetime to build. And that's just it, right? So a lot of times there's a lot of pressure on young leaders saying that, hey, you were in that position for a few years, and what were the mistakes that you made and what would you do differently? And of course, there are so many things that one could do differently, right? But don't let that pull you down, because I went through that. I felt guilty for a very long time because I thought that, hey, I could have dealt with that situation differently. But then I thought about it so much, and it hit me that what I did then was the best I could do then. And just this realization that my leadership style will evolve for the rest of my life, just that realization was so important, right? So yeah, I think that's mostly what I would tell people.
Thank you for sharing that. I think that what I learned from that is kind of that you're changing always, you're evolving consistently as a leader, and beating yourself up or not forgiving yourself for some of the mistakes that you may have made isn't going to be conducive to your growth later on. And what you said in kind of the beginning part of that, to be very actively or consciously thinking about what leadership means, those two things that you mentioned go hand in hand. The active conscious thinking and the not beating yourself up are kind of intertwined. If you think about what you've done, your successes, your failures, and then you kind of say, I made a mistake, I was 26 years old and I don't think I should have done that, and you reflect on it, then who knows how much growth and learning for you personally can come out of something like that.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. Panelists, any kind of last comments, pieces of advice that you'd like to share?
She said a very good point, Pranjal. To your point, leadership style is always evolving, and there's something like situational leadership. You may be good at, some people are very good at handling stress.
Yes.
And some people are good at, planning much in advance. There is no perfect style. It depends on the situation. Just being aware of what your strengths are and what you want to own yourself. Because as she said, leadership is always evolving. So knowing that I'm not good at handling stress means I need to be conscious of it, because you'll always be thrown in stress situations. You'll always be expected to step up. So knowing what you need to do better is also kind of consciously evolving.
Any other comments from our panelists? And then what we'll do is we'll open up to a Q&A, because I'm sure that we have some questions. Yes, Evgenia, go for it.
So I'm a big promoter of empathic leadership and emotions and vulnerability and the value that holds. But I've received some backlash even at INSEAD from people who are saying that takes away from your authority. So I wanted to get any tips or thoughts on how to balance that style of servant leadership or emotional human approach without letting it take away from authority.
I'll jump in there because it's something that I have came up against before. I recently got told by my bosses that I'm too nice. And somebody else told me I was too nice in a week later. I was like, goodness, you maybe don't see me when I'm firefighting. But I think it comes with, I'm very naturally emotional. I always am. I want to know how people are feeling. I want to get to know people personally. But I think we touched on it earlier, as long as you set what the boundaries are. So I have high expectations in terms of timelines, deliverables, all of these things. But if something goes wrong, you want people to be able to say to you, I've done something wrong, messed up. Can you help me? Like I'm in the absolute weeds and things like that. So as long as you set your boundaries in terms of this is what my expectations are in terms of whether it's the roles or responsibilities, be as emotional as you want. And anybody that says differently, I'm not saying, we're going to work and we start laying out all of our dirty laundry and things like that. But you being open to people as a leader will make people feel that they can be open to you. So clear in terms of what the expectations are in the overall work side of things, but never stop your emotions because it will draw people to you and people will learn from you. So then when they lead people in the future, it's okay to say, I've done something wrong. I really need your help. Do you know that side of things as well? So boundaries and be yourself, because trying to fit into a mold of what people think leaders should be will never work. You won't feel comfortable. Your team who you're leading will know that that's not your authentic, natural self. If you're known as being someone who's very open and then you try and be a leader who's quite autocratic, it doesn't work. So don't go against it.
What was your response to those people who said you're too nice?
I laughed really loud because I was in the weeds and I was on one of the calls at 10 p.m. at night. And I said, well, maybe if you speak to another team of MDs in a different country who actually think that I'm very, very, probably more autocratic. So again, different regions, different geographies, people's culture and things like that perceive it very differently. Also as well, there's a thing in terms of if you're being too nice, and I don't know whether anybody else in the room has felt the same. If I push too hard in being autocratic, I'm being that bossy, horrible woman. So it's a difficult balancing act. So again, it's who you're leading, which geographies you're working with and things like that.
I think there is an illusion as well that being empathic means that you're nice. And I think, but like, I think it's two extremely different things. And I think it really shows this old school style of leadership that's still like flowing through a lot of both academics, but also companies, that you shouldn't lead with empathy, you should rule with an iron fist, which is not really how we want to develop the leaders of tomorrow, right? So I think, and also this thing with you are too nice as a leader, it's quite fun because it never comes from below, it always comes from top.
Yeah.
Which is kind of fascinating, right? So I think this says more about the leaders who actually say it than it says about you as a leader. So I think it comes back to what I said before as well, is that being empathic in difficult situation, you can still have very difficult conversation with employees without being just tough, but actually being empathic in the discussions with them.
Thank you for the question as well. Any comments or questions from the audience?
Maybe I have a question. So maybe if you've experienced a situation where you've outgrown a mentor or a mentee, or you didn't click with that individual, how do you move on from that relationship without ruining the relationship or living it in a negative way? So can you speak to maybe an experience that you've had where you've had to move on?
That's a really good question and a tough one.
I can speak about that. Very long ago, there was this person in my team who was a very bright guy. And I've been kind of mentoring him for a long time. Now he's a really bright guy. So right from it, he would be a big leader. So over a period of time, he moved countries and now he's a risk leader of a big bank. So we are good friends, but obviously I'm not his mentor. And somewhere along the way, when he moved on, that's the way I said, hey, you know, I introduced him to somebody else in there. And he found another person whom he could talk to more on a career side. We're still very good friends, but we don't have that regular mentor calls or, you know, because he's moved way ahead. But that doesn't stop us from being good friends and having had that journey so far. So somewhere along the way, you kind of, you know, realize that you cannot have career discussions because you moved much ahead. I can still kind of guide you on a few things, but you need to find another, somebody else to talk to bounce off professional ideas. The other, like your situation where you said you don't get along, that's the feeling you get right from, you know, a couple of meetings and you know that I'm not comfortable sharing more with you and you know that relationship won't go far. In which case it will slowly die a natural death in my mind. You know, it will not burn. So you don't want to waste your time and my time kind of thing. So it will slowly work. And it's okay. I mean, as I said, don't give up. You will find that one person with whom it will click and guide you on.
Can I ask you, sorry, do you mean as you as the mentee or as someone, sorry, you being the mentor or a mentee?
Can be either. I was just curious, can be either.
I think it's so on what Joaquin mentioned is sometimes you have to have difficult conversations because say, for example, if you're the mentor and you have a mentee, not that they have to listen to everything that you say, but it doesn't really click. That's a really difficult conversation to have. It's like leaving a personal trainer or a GP that you've gone to for a long time. How do you sort of move away from that relationship? And I think if you're the mentor and you mentor other people, I think having a very open conversation, again, being empathetic with them, this may not be working, maybe let me help you find somebody that it might be a better fit instead of just cutting it dead. I would say have a think about who in your network could maybe help this person. What is it that you maybe aren't clicking on and what they maybe need help with from somebody else. But and I'd also do it sooner rather than later because there's nothing like having a slightly funny relationship.
Thank you. Does that do justice to your question? I know it's such a tricky one to navigate. Like,
Situations, different positive situations. I was just curious as to what you've experienced if that situation was not so pleasant or not so positive, and maybe pleasant, positive, but you wanted to move on.
I had a mentor once and it was for a role that I really, really wanted to be involved in. And it was at the UK Treasury. This is a really, really long time ago. Whitehall, and it was absolutely great. The lady who was my mentor, we didn't click. So this is another one of those relationships where it was very, very competitive. And even though I was excited to work there, I felt that it was just getting very difficult. So in the end, I sort of actually rolled myself away from it, which is I probably should have spoken up and said why I was finding it quite difficult, but I was a lot younger at the time. So in hindsight, I probably would have done things differently. But obviously in my bullshit youth, I was like, I'm doing it more. So that's at a detriment to myself as well.
So if I may add, I have actually maybe a relevant example. So straight out of INSEAD, when I was offered the Carmody job, it was a role to be the CEO of this company, Carmody, which is present in 7 countries in Southeast Asia. It was a pretty amazing opportunity, honestly. And I was very young. I had no prior experience of doing such a thing. So one of my mentors, I called him very excitedly and I showed him the offer and I said, you know, this is the role that has been offered to me. And I thought he's going to be extremely elated for me. But the first thing that he said to me was, I don't think this is right for you, or you're right for this job. How are you going to do this? How are you going to like tackle this challenge that has been put in front of you? And you might set yourself up for failure, right? That was not the response that I wanted to hear from my mentor. I mean, once I got past the initial disappointment, obviously it's about, like, at least for me in that moment, I realized that he had a point in that he thought as my senior that I did not have the relevant experience to take up this job, right? But I also knew the passion inside of me. And I also knew that I don't know if I was cut out for the job or if I would be good at it, but I would give it my very best, more than anyone else would, right? So I think in that moment, we both just accepted the differences. If you're two mature people, then you can just accept that you have different opinions on something. It wasn't about me listening to what he said or him listening to what I wanted to do. And we kind of took a break, like without saying, just for 6 months, right? But I think post 6 months, once he realized how hard I was working at it. And, we casually kept in touch. He became one of the people who helped me the most in those 3 years. Like, he had the best advice for me. He connected me to, some of the most influential people at the time who could help me out. So I think it's about not feeling bad, if it's also like a little bit like a child and parent relationship, right? Like, you always don't agree with what your parents have to say and vice versa. So it's about letting that relationship, if you trust in your mentor, if you like them for who they are, then it's about just letting it be for a while and letting that relationship grow and evolve also. And at least in my case, eventually, it came around, and now I seek his advice all the time again.
Thank you for sharing that. I think that was a nice message of positivity. If you sometimes let things sit, they might not be as bad as they once were. I don't think it works in all situations, but I like that one without doing something, rash right away of, oh gosh, how could you say that to me?
Yeah.
And it had a fruitful ending, right? So thank you for sharing that once again. Folks, this brings us to an end. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you to our panelists. Your insights were truly wonderful. I think you've given us all some food for thought. And on behalf of Women in Business and Hoffman Institute, thank you everyone for your time and your efforts in bringing this together.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, there is water for all of you then.